welcome to the Fashioning Resurgence panel series co-presented by Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto and the School of Fashion at Ryerson University. My name is Riley Kucherin, and I'm an assistant professor of design leadership at the School of Fashion. Thank you for joining us, our audience members, and thank you, Chimigwech, to our participants for inviting us into your living rooms, it looks like, and sharing your perspectives. I want to jump right in to introductions and ask our panelists to talk about themselves and the work that they do. Garvia, can we start with you?
Of course. My name is Garvia Bailey, and I am a producer and a host, and I do radio and I do storytelling, and I'm a podcast producer and host, but I'm also teach workshops on storytelling for creatives and the importance of using story in how we push our whatever product that is, be it yourself or your music or your fashion or your art, and the importance of story. I brand myself as a storyteller first and maybe a broadcaster producer second. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I live in Toronto, and yeah.
Awesome, and storytelling is so important to Indigenous design. So glad to have you here. One of the Foxels, do you want to go next?
Andrew, you start now.
Okay, so I'm Andrew. I'm one half of Foxwell Studio with Ian, who on my screen is down there. So we're in London. We're calling from London today, and we have a design creative studio. We generally work in fashion and arts and design. My background is in actually fashion design back in the day, and then I ended up going more into art directing and then film directing, and now, because all media is chopped up and is everything to everyone, so now I guess you could say I'm a director of various media and stories and brands, and we have a bunch of commercial clients. We also we work with lots of charities in various, from women's rights to children protection charities. We teach at the Royal College of Art and the Fashion MA. We've taught at Parsons in New York. So we're not sitting behind a desk pumping out brand design. We're also very aware and interested in a bit more of a sort of wider gaze into what makes up stories. I guess what separates us from what Garvia does, maybe I think why maybe it's a good team to talk about things today, is because we end up a lot of our work is in, or people come to us to execute, to realize things in quite a graphical or image sense. So we never say that we're a full-blown strategy company. We often work with people to hear their strategies and then translate them into image making. And then lastly, in case Ian forgets to say, we also have a new magazine that we started in lockdown, #1, which is a fashion technology magazine, looking at quite a contemporary art view on fashion and technology crossovers. And that's it. Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, so I'm Ian, Andrew's brother, and we started. So I come from a graphic design illustration background. That was where I sort of graphic artist illustration, and we sort of decided to combine our sort of skill sets into Foxwell Studio to 2006. And since then, we've been working together. I think not much to add on what we do, but just while we're here, I guess, is that 2.5 years ago, we did a workshop, Indigenous Fashion Week over in Toronto, and it was working with like 4 or 5 brands, individual brands, helping them convey their message through a workshop. It's a 2-day workshop that we sort of created of images at the end of it. And I think it was really, that's kind of what we do. I guess we, as Andrew said, we sort of interpret people's stories, and personally, I'm the one that sort of takes it into a graphic realization. Andrew's more art direction, creative direction. so yeah, it's great to be back basically 2.5 years later on Zoom.
So everyone here is friends of Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto and has worked with Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto before. So I definitely want to dive in to that workshop you did with those 5 designers in 2018. And Garvia, you've worked with IFWTO before as well, correct?
I have. I've done a couple of workshops, and one was just in January of this past year, which feels like 800 years ago, but it was just January, and went to Thunder Bay in preparation for Indigenous Fashion Week, and sat and did my workshop with some incredible creators and designers, and we had quite a session. So.
You described it as branding as counseling. It was a very emotional experience. You want to talk about just what was it like working with all those designers and entrepreneurs?
Well, I think a lot of my job with this workshop is to get to the point where people can go to Andrew and Ian with their story. And so for my workshop, it's almost convincing people of the importance, convincing creators of the importance of the personal story, and not being afraid of in putting that first person pronoun into the work that they do, digging deep into the whys of the creation, digging deep into connecting with through stories. As a journalist, oftentimes people come to me and they have, or I get a stack of stories that people would like me to tell or would like me to write about. And I'm driven by a personal story. If I love the fashion, that's one thing. But if that fashion has a story connected to it, if I know the why of it, it becomes something else entirely. So the reason why it feels like counseling for many people is that it's not often that someone just gives you the license to say, talk about you and talk about why, and make that central to your creative process. And I think it became therapy for people because no one necessarily asks that question in such a straight way and demands an answer and gets you to dig deep into why you do what you do. And sometimes it can get quite sticky when we start looking at ourselves and the reasons why we do the things that we do. And so it does feel a little bit like therapy, and that's okay though. I think that's where our connections lie, when we get to those vulnerable places and can see that. And I think storytelling is a place of vulnerability for the most part, to be able to share in that way, to share personal storytelling. So yeah, that's why it ends up, people come out and we're all a little bit teary-eyed and we have to take a lot of breaks, which is fine. But once you start to embody that and be comfortable in just telling it and find a comfortable way to tell your story, that's what my workshop really is about. And that's what my life's work is about that. Mm-hmm.
Right. And for Indigenous designers, I feel like our fashion is so often healing, and it is there to support community, there to support the resurgence of our culture. Foxels, do you want to jump in on that process? So if someone has that why and they're thinking clearly about why they do what they do, how do you then translate that why into an image?
Yeah.
There's a lot of different, I guess there's a lot of different things to talk about within that. It's quite we sort of work, this is the difference between an individual and a brand. I guess there's quite a lot to speak about that, because an individual is like sort of like the storytelling, like it comes from them. But then when you're talking about a brand, it's sometimes necessary to sort of take it beyond the individual and sort of like, and see it as a sort of as a brand, rather than just like, this is what I believe and this is what I do, and like trying to translate that into something that's not cliched and not. It's like Andrew and I were speaking about before the call about this, the indigenous fashion, how there's always a very sort of, like you were saying, it's integral to the work. The sort of the story next to this. Say if it's a fashion label, it's integral to this label. Where in the brands, a lot of the brands we work with, it's not so. It can maybe exist without such a strong storyline, but I think with the indigenous fashion, it's like it has to be told some way. And I think it's just the main thing is about finding a way to tell it that's not. It's memorable, that sets you apart from the next person telling the same story or similar story, and it's memorable, but it's also not cliched, not sort of just trying to get an individuality to the imagery you're creating that sets you apart.
In physical or real terms, we, in terms of taking a story from where Gavia might leave it and bring it to us, and it comes to brands are all very different, but they're all typically, a lot of the time, someone will say, we'll come with okay, we don't have much budget to do too much, so let's just look at the logo. And then we always push back. It's not that, that's just one example, but I think with the designers we're talking about today, it's kind of typical of people trying to take that story that they now understand and turn it into what they think of as a brand, which is sort of logo, maybe the fonts, if they're interested in that kind of thing, obviously a website, or even just straight to Instagram, and then they think about the content for that. So maybe those are the kind of pillars that we would look at, but it's different for everyone. But that's kind of typically what the journey that will take them through. But then because it's always so different, some people might, like in the workshops that we did in Toronto, I think one of the brands came back with more text-based answers because they wanted to tell their story so much in written form that suddenly the images didn't matter. But then another person in the workshop might have a very strong idea of a woman that they're trying to get to portray. So then it becomes very much about imagery because they were more image literate. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that you have got to work with what assets they have for production, for continuing that believable story. So if they have a very strong vision for a woman, then that turns into an image or a film. And if they have a very strong manifesto, which is a call to arms, then it goes into more text-based brand. But yeah, every brand's different. So there's no one size fits all at all. But I think one thing that I'll touch on now, because I didn't discuss that before in the emails or previous discussions, is that we do these brand workshops with up and coming designers. And one of the key things that we try and put across is that it doesn't cost a lot to get the right content out. It doesn't need to cost a lot to get the right content out. It costs a lot if you want to look like Gucci, and if that's your benchmark. But we very quickly try to, and Gavi, this is I'm sure where you're trying to get people to leave your space, your process, not wanting to be Gucci. The whole point is that your story is going to be stronger than Gucci for you, and for you to be able to sustain a business and to create a dialogue with your customers. So if they want to do a copy of Gucci, then yes, they can't afford it. But if they have an iPhone, I mean, the beauty of self-publishing that's been going on through all the apps in the last 10 years is that everyone can publish. The negative side is that it's a very busy, crowded marketplace. So it means that what you're trying to say has to be so genuine. And that's why Gavia's side of what is so key, because you can't you can't go out and say, I want to be looking like the best, whatever it is. It has to come from something which is integral to them. So yeah, I'm sort of going off on lots of different tangents, but I think that's quite important to pick up on the fact that it's now quite affordable to start a brand. I hate this idea of someone sitting somewhere in the world and think with a great vision and something strong to say, and then them holding themselves back because they imagine that it's going to cost a inconceivable amount of money that they can't make to create this brand. So that's something that we always try and tackle in our workshops. I
also, and it's absolutely true, Andrew. Like, I think that the work that I do is really about being able to present to Andrew and Ian someone who feels that they have come to an authentic place in who they are and how they work and what they want to put out into the world. So even if that means that they go that, and I take Ian's point completely, that that you don't want to be, something that came up in one of the workshops that I did was someone said, I don't want to exploit myself through this story. I don't want to be playing around and sort of in trauma or those sorts of things, like, and so what I try to do is get people to the point where their story isn't a cliche because it's their story, and they can take that thing that they want to express to the world and authentically express it to an Ian or an Andrew, and then it goes to the next phase. But I think a lot of people don't even get to that point. A lot of creators don't even get to that point where people are asking them, why do you do what you're doing? And what does it mean? And what do you want to express to the world through that?
You're totally right, Gravi, about this, because we always use an example of a sort of Turkish UK brand called Bora Aksu. We did some work with them sort of for the last 10 years, and they're kind of a big brand now. But the guy, the Bora, the person that started the brand, is a very sort of sensitive, is a lovely guy, very quiet, and he never knew how he could make amazing sort of a collection of clothes, and he can sort of write about them very well and sort of draw about them, but he couldn't really speak about it. So it held him back a lot, thinking that he couldn't speak in social media about it because he wasn't that kind of confident with it. And then we just basically said, like, the voice of the brand is going to be basically people, as if it's a person in his studio speaking about sort of the operations rather than him speaking. So he never spoke, and he's basically all the social media became all about, oh, we've just seen Bora enter the building, we've just done, and it's like it changed the whole thing because it took it out of him, it took him off him. So he was just doing what he was doing, and it was still about his concepts and his passions, but it's spoken about in a different voice, which really helps. It's just like removing the voice from him, and it's like, and it's still it was authentic. It wasn't fabricating anything. It was still the same pillars of the brand, but it was just spoken about in a different tone.
Yeah, we say this quite a lot to brands, that if their story isn't right, then it's going to cost them a ton of money, because the prime example is PR. I mean, PR, God bless them all. I mean, they want to do good for your brands, but unless you give them a good story, you might as well throw the money away, because they will try to PR what they think of you, and they'll guess, but it's not their job to guess, and it's not their fault if suddenly they positioned you in a market where you're being talked about a lot in a certain circle, which has nothing to do with where you want to go in your brand. So it costs a lot, and that's for big brands as well as small brands. But I think that's what you're picking up, what you're saying, Garvey, that you try to let people leave your process with that clear vision so they can come and explain it, and it saves money, man. It's like, that's the main thing. Like, it saves you a lot of money.
And any like tips for nailing down that why? Like, how do you get to that essence or that authenticity? Like, how do you pull that out from someone who hasn't had a chance to take a step back and look at it more holistically?
I think with anything, it takes practice. you know, like just having the practice of meditating on the work, like really, it's like, I know this is so, I'm very much a Pisces and very like purple sort of sometimes. I'm a little bit soft and fuzzy, but I really do believe in the idea of journaling out creativity, you know, writing down why are you using this material? Like take a look at this material, feel it, touch it. Why does it matter? And why do you want to use it? And what does it say about who you are? Um, uh, who am I speaking to with this particular design? What do I want to say to them? And why does it matter? Like, I think that once you start sort of just the basic idea of writing, maybe just, you know, 5 minutes a night, what I accomplished today, why I made this thing the way I made it, what it says about me as a creator. I really believe in that idea of journaling down into it. And it takes a bit of self-reflection. Sometimes it takes a bit of communication with the people that are closest to you doing similar work, perhaps. Like I encourage people to create cohorts of people that they can talk to about what this process means to them quite deeply and see how they are expressing themselves through the work. But it's all practice. It's all being really familiar with yourself and why you're doing it. And that means that you have to sit down with it and grab a journal and write it or talk about it. I think that just that simple act of picking up an object and writing about why it's important to you and what it means to you in a deep way, going like, you know, getting into the nitty gritty of who you are and why you're doing what you do. It's practice. Do you journal? Do you have a journal?
Every day I'm like, I need to be journaling. I know I do, but my calendar gets away from me and I can't. But I love that. It's
right. Yeah. I totally agree, Garvey. I think the main thing is from that is this sort of sharing things. I think is really, when we're doing brand workshops, is one of my favorite parts is when you see someone present their work and they don't actually know what their story is, and they're sort of really anxious about it. So like, where am I? What am I doing? I don't know where the link is between our stuff. And then you can see it. Like, I guess we're quite in tune with sort of seeing brands develop through. But you can see the story completely clearly. Like someone else can see it. And I love it when you sort of explain the story back to them. It's like, oh no, this is what you're about. Did you not know? And it's like, oh yeah. And it's really gratifying. It's like because it's definitely about, you have to get it out of your own head. And like, so you know, when we have these workshops, if someone comes in with a really clear idea of what they are, and that's what I am this, I'm about this, I'm doing this. It's like not all the time, but generally it's like you kind of a little bit like open yourself up more maybe, and sort of like this process is about, and it's usually that you get to a point where it's slightly different or sometimes very different to what they actually thought. But yes, it's a lovely thing to witness when someone doesn't think they've got the DNA, but they actually have.
And then there's people that come through that feel like, why does anyone care why I'm doing this? Like why should anyone care about my story? Like, is this, and it's often those people that have the most compelling reasons why someone would care about what they're doing, you know, like it's one of those things where we're, like I say, we're not asked the question why enough just as individuals. And when we ask that of each other and of ourselves, and then like that's where connection comes. Like some of the brands that we were presented with some brands as case studies for this talk, and it's that place of, how do I personally connect with that? And that will happen within the first 2 minutes, like 30 seconds of me clicking on their video or their website or whatever. So what is that moment of connection? And it's true that some people walk in and they think they know exactly what is happening. And then 2 hours later, someone else is telling them, no, I think this is your story. And that click is a beautiful thing, Ian. It's so true. It's such a gratifying, beautiful thing to see.
Totally.
I think group situations are key for that as well, right? I mean, I think it's the same as counseling. I mean, it's the same as trying to get anything out. What do? You go to your community and you come clean and you ask for help and you toss the ideas around and you self-critique so well in that environment. And also, I think the idea of a deadline is good. So we do these fanzine workshops, which is what we did in Toronto. We've done one in Lagos and in Ukraine and Kiev and in New York and Parsons. And the premise was the British Council funded them and paid us to go to these places. And we went to them with this idea of what they said, we're going to Lagos, but something's messed up and you only have a day. And we're like, yeah, that's cool. Let's work with the constraints. So we kind of landed in Lagos and we said, we're going to make a fanzine in one day. That means, and imagine arriving in Lagos and there's 2 guys from Scotland standing, basically like the white man standing in front of 20 different new cool up and coming Lagos designers and being didactic. It's like, this is going to tank. We're not going to do this. So we previously sort of thought that might happen. So we came up with this idea of making them make a fanzine in one day, which is, and then suddenly, we stood up and everyone's like, okay, this looks so formulaic. They're going to do a brand workshop. And then when we said, okay, but in 5 hours time, you have to have a page in a fanzine next to somebody else in this room. And it has to say who you are and what's going to be on it. And then suddenly everyone, it just lit a fire underneath the whole room. Everyone's and screaming, and it was incredible, the transformation. So I think deadline, group, these things are all sort of key factors. I mean, there's no one size fits all, but I think that definitely speaking about it, getting out there and wanting, and it's hard with creative stuff, with your own eponymous brand, you're so close to it, so it's so hard to go out and ask for help. That's why you get these people coming into the room, right, with like, I know what it's about, and then they're the ones to break down. These are the approaches.
So a whole lot of introspection and reflection, collaboration, and speaking with others about what your brand is or how they perceive your brand, and maybe see the congruencies or lack of. And then time deadlines, and that crunch might also, put some pressure on articulating that brand and narrowing down on that vision. So let's take a look at some examples. So before the panel, I propose we take a look at Ginu, an Indigenous denim and t-shirt company, and Tanya Larson, who does jewelry out of Yellowknife. And I'd also be curious, Foxels, if you want to speak a bit more about your collaboration in 2018 when you worked with the 5 designers from Toronto, which was Shosho Esquiro, Curtis Olin, Justin Louis, Janelle Woe, and Leslie Hampton. But Garvia, do you want to go first about some of your impressions about Ginu and Tanya Larson?
I just love, I thought that they were just both super strong in terms of just initial impression of story for me. Like, I felt like I was pulled into something right away. But one of the things is, the guys work in a lot of visual stuff, but I'm a reader, like I read everything. So I always go to the about section and feel and see what the story is. I'm just like, who are these people? With Ginu, especially, I was struck by their story, but I was also struck by the fact that they start this thing in their about section where they start talking about themselves first they're talking in first person pronouns, and then it switches to this third person thing where I felt like the important parts of their stories it didn't feel like they were talking to me anymore. It felt like someone else was looking at them and then talking to me about them, which was really interesting to me. I was like, all this would take was like a switch of a few words to have me feel like it's them talking to me again, which is where I think the strength of who they are, Eric and Amanda, I was just like, I want to be friends with Eric and Amanda. Look at this cool guy on his motorcycle. Could that be Eric? Could that be Amanda? I don't know. I want to figure all of it out. You know what I felt really drawn to the brand and the story that they told as a brand, but I wanted to know more about the story that they told as Eric and Amanda, because it's all there. It just took like just a tiny little switch in wording for me to make it deeply personal. And that was the difference with the other example, Tanya. It's Tanya, right? Yeah,
Tanya.
Where it was, I felt like it was all her telling me about, like, I felt like I was walking into her world for the whole time, that I was like going through the images, the way she talked about each individual piece and the materials. It was all, I decided that I wanted to do this. I work with this because of this. And I just felt very drawn to it. But both beautiful examples. I mean, I was like, who's doing the work for these people? Because this is good. But yeah, I always feel like story first is the best way to go. And those are two good examples of it.
Andrew or Ian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm looking at them both just now. I've obviously looked at them before. Yeah, it's different because in terms of design, like of websites, of sort of different sort of looking at it, the junior one, it just looks a little bit, they're telling such a unique story, and it's all the same for these brands. It's just like you've got such a unique story, and the sort of the way it's communicated maybe looks like we were saying, you don't want to be Gucci, you don't want to be this, and it maybe looks like it's sort of slightly in the main film. We thought it was like it's maybe getting too glossy and too sort of overproduced, maybe, to sort of tell the authenticity story strongly enough. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it seems that there's no kind of, for us, it's quite a sort of barrier to get into the brand visually. It was like, you've seen a lot of these imagery, a lot of it, this type of imagery before, and it's done well. There's no argument. It's done well, and it's the way they speak about themselves, as Gravio said. It's like, it's great. It's got an amazing. It's got a great story, and they got really good. You can see where they're trying to go with it. But I think maybe this particular campaign, we thought maybe it could be a little bit more them and more of them coming out, and sort of it seems like it's quite glossy to us.
Ian, did you read their about section? Did you take a look at that?
Yeah, the two people and that sort of.
Yeah, Eric and Amanda, because their story itself is unbelievable. I was like, why aren't we seeing that story?
Exactly, it's awesome. It's just like, and that's the thing. It's almost like they got a little bit scared to tell that story, and sort of like lost like this kind of like drone footage and stuff. And it's like, you know, sort of this thing about like drones in a desert with a big bike. It's just like, I don't know. I don't want to be too critical of it, because you're not spoken to the brand, but I think in terms of the story, as you say, it's great. It's a really interesting story. I think if the communication was like sort of had more of that sort of heart in it, I think, and it's easy to change. It's easy to update as well.
And the images that they used with the motorcycle guy and all that, what struck me was that it didn't seem totally connected to their story, which I was like, oh, okay, so, oh, okay, all right. But it's connected to, I guess, a feeling that they want to convey, which is of, you know, freedom and coolness and all of those things. So, but then when I read their story, I was like, why don't I see that? Like there was a wedding buffalo that they used the leather from to create from their own wedding. I was like, That story is amazing. It is incredible. I'm like, I'm gonna buy 6 belts because this is, you know, if I could afford it. But, you know, and he hunted, the buffalo hunted by their family members. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there was so much there that I felt like I want to know Eric and Amanda better through the images and their stuff.
I think, and it's like every campaign has, I mean, every year has, I guess, if it's seasonal or if it's like sort of whatever, however often the sort of the new collections come out or the new clothes come out, everyone has to, they have to have a little bit of a different story based on top of their sort of story. But I don't know what you thought, Andrew, because we've not had a chance to speak about it. I just thought it was it wasn't that engaging for what the brand is.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, as I said, the caveat is that we don't know these guys, and no disrespect. And I think that it's such a difficult pulpit that they're trying to preach from, and they have this added complication of trying to get this indigenous aspect within their brand. But having said that, you know, I think it's positive to be critical, and things move forward with criticism. So that gives me license to be critical right now. And I don't think I want to. I think what's helpful to say, I think that you straight away when you see that brand, you see lots of different imagery, which seems to be, you know, shot with different direction from an art direction point of view, and it's confusing, and that is so normal for a brand that hasn't really managed to get their voice to the fore. And I think you never really see, we often say this, like you never really see the brand or hear about the brands which aren't doing well because they just drop off. So you're always looking at the brands that are doing well, which are really hard things to put yourself against, especially if you're trying to grow your brand awareness and tell your story. So yeah, I think that I don't know, so one of the first things that struck me when I saw that brand was that there's a lot of different imagery, and they haven't managed to get this voice coming through yet. And I think about the successful brands that, so I mean, I always go back to things like the big great brands, but it's a stupid example to give, but like Hermes or all these brands that have been around for a long time, their story hasn't changed, their imagery hasn't really changed. Yes, it goes with the times, and you know, film styles and photography styles and angles will change and models will change, but generally they are successful when they stick to the story. We work with a dermatology brand for the last 12 years, and we're using the same model and the same 6 images, which we update every 4 or 5 years, but it's pretty much the same for 12 years because we haven't needed to change it. And you know, it's not in our interest to keep the same images. We get more money for doing new images, but it worked for the brand. And it's so anyway, long way of saying that I think that I keep forgetting the name of it, sorry. How do you say Ginu or Ginu?
I think it's,
yeah, I think
is it
Ginu, right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think we're hitting at.
They're trying. Sorry, they're trying to. It feels like they're trying to exercise different viewpoints, and then the problem is that when you go from a concept to making an image to put out as your brand, there's lots of people that have to get involved in between. And if your story is not completely tight, and if you don't know about all these different things like art direction, what kind of, if there's good photographers at your disposal, if you've got the money to be able to afford these people, then you know it does get skewiffed. And I think that's what happened with this brand. That's the sort of main thing that I'm getting from seeing it. And as everyone agrees here, they've got such strong things to say, and it's a bit of a shame that it doesn't seem to be jumping out.
I think we're hitting at something important here in that I feel like a lot of Indigenous designers feel like they have to project a certain like aura of fashion itself. Like we have in our mind the idea of what is fashion, what is, you know, how do we hit at those notions of like luxury fashion, like the Hermes or the Gucci's. And I think what I'm hearing is that to like go back to basics in a sense, and go back to yourself and your true, like your family and your history. And that's so much about what this brand is about, is that marriage. And I have that wedding buffalo skull they printed it on organic cotton t-shirts, and there's one hanging in my closet right now because I could access that story. I felt so connected to their wedding. It was like I'm a guest at their wedding, so of course I want to buy a t-shirt.
Yeah, it's great. It's like sort of positively, like the Section 35 sort of we worked with sort of 2 years ago in the workshop. I was looking back, just doing some research for this call, looking back at their Instagram feed, and it's just like, it's amazing. It's totally amazing, and the imagery there is just like kind of really like sort of confrontational. It's fun, you know, it's all about sort of from a very sort of personal viewpoint, but it's as a brand, it's just like spot on. We think it's great, and I think that shows, you know, the production's good. It's like kind of the production is sort of it's not like high production, but it's just like it just suits it. It's not they're sort of shooting on a phone, or they're doing some campaign stuff as well, but it all fits in this like. It's just it's a really good looking sort of well
systems.
Yeah, systems.
And did you mention that Indigenous designers might not necessarily need to be creating new campaign images, you know, every season, doing the new glossies?
I guess it's just, as we were saying about Junior, it's just like getting stuck into the sort of things that other brands do that are sort of much bigger, and like sort of like having these like big main campaign imagery, main campaign films, or sort of doing seasonal collections, or doing, I guess it all comes from like, it's like sort of fashion weeks or whatever, saying you need to show every 6 months, or like every 3 months now, and I don't know if it works. You know, it's difficult. Everyone has their own things they need to sort of hit, but I would say that if it doesn't feel right doing a collection and sort of new campaign imageries every 6 months, don't do it.
No, it's a point well taken. Andrew, we were talking earlier before about how articulating your brand and the authenticity of your brand might not necessarily have to fall on the designers themselves every time, and that there might be a role for other people in supporting these narratives. And you mentioned something like Made in Italy as an example, like the brand of Made in Italy that then supports Italian designers. Do you just want to touch on that idea?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big talking point, and I think that we need to have lots of time to talk about it, because I've personally, from working with Indigenous Fashion Week before and thinking about it since, I think this is pretty much one of the sort of core problems, is that there needs to be this brand needs to be looked after outside the brands. One of the first things we did with Section 54, is it?
35.
35, sorry. And when I met him, he kept on ticking me off behind the ear, like, no. Section 34. He said, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? Sorry.
The brand, the overall brand, Made in Italy.
Oh yeah. So yeah, he came in a very aggressive way, and the brand came across in a very aggressive way. And one of the first things we did in the first sort of 2 hours of the workshop was just to really delicately try and pick it apart, because it's not for us to say don't be angry, but it's for us to say maybe your message is going to come across stronger if you say it in a less angry way. And that, I don't know, I can't say that it totally transformed it. I think we had such great conversation in the workshop with him, because he was really responding to this. He's like, yeah, I've been waiting for someone to sort of come up against me like that, because it is, and it was just a totally outsider point of view. I think we just saw his website and Instagram that morning on the workshop, and this really strongly came across. And I think it doesn't need, so when I said that it shouldn't have to fall on the designers, I think that he was carrying the burden of having to say these very important things for him and his culture and his family inside the brand. Okay, yes, there is a space for these brands to be vehicles for this voice. I'm not detracting from that. That's so important. But I do think that if there was I'll say that there need to be solutions. We need to discuss solutions that could help these brands to proliferate. One solution might be that there is this kind of more internal organization like Made in Italy, or like we work with Quality in Turkey, which is their version of it, which is very much government funded. I think Made in Italy is very government funded too. And their remits are just to uphold what this brand is. It's basically a massive PR machine for what Made in Italy is, and to the point where Made in Italy is an asset in on when it's stitched into a handbag. So, and what that does is take the heat off. You know, Dolce & Gabbana didn't need to, or don't. I keep picking luxury brands, but you know, Diesel don't need to say our jeans are quality because it's an Italian brand, and so it takes the pressure off them having to tell this in the brand story. So I think that the design, because it's a relatively small community, I do think that for Indigenous fashion, there needs to be this. I'd love to see this overnight change to trying a model like that, where it means that all the creatives involved there's a small community, so everyone can get a shoe and everyone can have a voice and can give ideas to what this sort of internal thing is. Because I guess what I mean is that, you know, what if it's protecting what the imagery and the way that we talk about it, and you know, taking that on and putting money behind it and getting governments to give money and getting money from wherever it is, but just making sure that that's a really clear, consistent image. Because then it means that, you know, say a brand wants to put some motif inside their collection, then I think that it's enough for them just to have it inside the collection. They don't need to have this big other communication around it. Yeah, it's a talking point. I'm not saying that's a solution. I think that it feels like there's a lot of pressure on these brands to tell the story, and I like to see what the next phase of that would be. I think there's some opportunities there. Right.
I'm hearing you that there is a role for everyone, because like Section 35 is educating people about Section 35 of the Indian Act, which has had such a profound effect on Indigenous peoples in Canada. But that's like the role for schools, for elementary education, to be educating people about what that is. But there hasn't been that education because of colonial education systems, so they feel it's their role to do that. But totally hearing you that you know, the way you articulate that anger, can you translate that anger to just passion, to think about you know, forwarding your brand in a different way? And I do love this idea of collaboration more. I think that's what you're also hinting at, which is collaborating across you know, Canada in terms of all Indigenous designers. Garvia, did you have any other thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, I agree with Andrew and Ian in approach, that, you know, the pressure to tell a full story. I mean, my thing is know your story and then find out how it relates to the branding, you know, and if it works and what elements of it. The other thing is with the approach that I take with this is that if I call you out of the blue as a creator for a story, that's when the greater story can come out. Like, that's when you need to know it. That's when you need to have it in your body. That's when you need to know the points that you want to hit. When it comes to the creatives, when people ask you about why do you chose this creative, that's when it comes out. So it's like a holistic kind of way of looking at all of this. It's not that all of your story has to reside in your brand campaign for 2020. It's not necessarily that. It's when it comes to being able to express who you are as designer and what it all means holistically, are you able to articulate that? Yeah. Are you able to go to a government or a funder or a grantor or a you know, or whatever it is, and be able to articulate it in a way that is compelling, that someone is drawn to?
Totally.
There's a sorry, there's a bit of a delay. Sorry, I just think there's a really good rule of thumb that we use a lot, which is that, you know, this applies to branding and telling your story. Is the idea that if you tell you want someone to hear about it secondhand, because then you can prove that your story is concise, or that your story is understood. Let's say, so I tell Johnny about, okay, there's this great new brand that I'm doing, and it's you know, it's got purple balloons, and so then Johnny goes and tells Angela, all right, I've heard about this great brand and it's got purple balloons or something. And if you tell them if I was to tell a person, it's purple balloons, I've got like monkeys on the motif, I've got the Mercedes-Benz outside the front, is about, if we complicate it, then that person won't have the confidence to tell the secondhand story to the next person, because everyone loves telling stories, but no one will tell a story that they're not confident about.
That's right.
So I think that's that's for us, that's always a sort of good rule of thumb. Like, you have to get this. That means that you have to be concise. That means you have to speak from the heart, as you keep saying, Garvey. Like, it has to come from there, otherwise it's not going to be believable. So yeah, I think that's.
Also, I think Garvey used about collaboration. I think, without turning it into sort of a brand sort of workshop. But yeah, this thing about collaborations, if you're asked to collaborate with someone by a brand, that's a sort of proof that your story is succinct enough to sort of sit next to another brand and not be confusing. So it's a really good indicator about where you're at. So if you're ever asked to collaborate with a big brand, or a big brand with a brand, and it makes sense for them, that means you're getting something right in terms of what you're, because I can imagine a bigger brand collaborating with Justin at Sections 35 and just it being kind of really, like, you can see the collaboration, you can see the partnership, but you can also see the distinct parts. And I think it's key to sort of try and achieve that kind of clarity within your brand.
Andrew, I love that purple balloon concept of the almost broken telephone, that you don't want the broken telephone. You want to be able to have that concise thing, so that it does, that story can travel and travel and travel and travel and travel in a way that makes sense, that is that people will always circle back to it and say, I want to check that out myself. Like, I heard about this purple thing, I'm gonna look it up, Google purple balloon guy, and then it's like, that's what you really want.
Totally. That's
exactly
right. And I think that a lot of the brands that we looked at in Indigenous Fashion Week that's what I want, going back to that, like, they're so labored, man, and I feel so sorry that they have to tell this story, and we sympathize, and we're so behind what they're saying, but it just, in terms of purely on a fashion brand, you need to have a basis, you need to have customers, and customers need to hear a concise story. They need to be able to get more customers. Johnny needs to tell Angela, and Angela needs to go off and tell 5 other people, and that's when you get the proliferation, that's when you get the uptake, that's when you get the sales. So from a brand point of view, really, this story that, Garvey, that you extract out of people that you work with, they just need to get this concise thing to go to at the end. Otherwise, as we said, they lose money with the wrong PR direction. It all starts to fall apart at that point when they don't have a concise story. They have the more than the purple balloon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Indigenous fashion designers are educators in a lot of ways, but you also have to remember they are fashion brands too, and there are you can't cram a lecture into a campaign image, even though I think that's often what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's just
yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that it is so, any kind of BIPOC creator has this, I feel like, always has this burden that sometimes white creators don't have, of, I need to tell the story of this struggle or whatever it is. And I think it's just such an unfair burden oftentimes, that it, it's so you have to be very conscious about how you approach that part of your story, because at the end of the day, you're just trying to create and realize your dream as a creator, like everyone else's, period, right? The story is so important, but also you are a creator in your soul. You want to make these things and have people buy them and create, so that you could create more things. That's at the essence of it. So to carry the burden of all of that can be very hard, but it is one that we choose. include myself. Like we choose to do it because it's important.
I
But
totally
we
agree.
Fashion. Sorry. Yeah.
So it's like very, very quickly. I know we've got only 5 minutes left. I remember doing an exchange in Tel Aviv in Israel when I was at art school, and they did a brief out there, and it's a brief we usually get in art school saying that, so just react to this and do this, and all the work there was all about conflict and war. That wasn't the theme of the brief, but the brief just came out as everyone's like conflict and sort of like anger and this and that. And I was thinking, this is so different to what I was in art school in Liverpool, and it's just that everyone's just doing like things based on like indie music or whatever, but all their sort of thinking was all about sort of their surroundings and the conflict about. It was just it was an eye opener. I totally understand and sort of empathize and everything with the sort of, you've got this kind of thing that you sort of, this burden is that you've got this thing to sort of you have to speak about, because it's not authentic if you don't speak about it. And then yeah.
There's a delay. Sorry.
Andrew, did you have anything to wrap up, perhaps?
Well, no, sorry, Ian was. I'm not very good at wrapping up generally, as you probably can tell. No, I just you know, I don't want it to come across that I was saying that, you know, you should tone it down in any way, because this is such an important thing to be putting out, and fashion is such a great vehicle for it, because people see clothes before people listen to somebody. So let's keep it going in any way you can. But I think that there needs to be better. I think that would accelerate the process if there were better forums and a better feedback loop, and more people discussing these things together, because sharing the same goal. And it has to be multifaceted, but I think there's better ways to do it. And I don't think it's not about toning down or adjusting the way you speak about the anger. It's also about, because it's also about all the other facets of this, of these things coming through, that you know, the beauty, the love, the Hermes. I think one of the best things I've heard about Hermes, speaking about their products or people's human products, is one of the Hermes sons or heirs said that my granddad used to always say it's about seeing a love in a product, and as soon as the customer sees that love, then they're drawn to it. And so there's so much of all these things that can be put into, you know, this area that we're talking about, and it's complicated. I think, as in therapy, generally we got to keep speaking about it. People have to put it on the agenda. There needs to be more forums, more discussions, people setting up sort of weekly calls between designers, and then it's developing. I mean, we are with this great fashion week that has arrived on the scene and is starting these debates. So it will get there, and I just want to say, let's keep pushing it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I think that was a pretty good wrap. That's not so bad.
That's it. Cut. I think you're hitting on it exactly. Like, that's what Indigenous Fashion Week or Indigenous Fashion Weeks across the country are all about, or a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurship accelerators cropping up all over the country, you know, getting people together to start talking about these, start reflecting on your brand, to start collaborating. I think that's what's so important. I think this was a great conversation. I think we planted a lot of seeds for people that they might pick up on little pieces of this, and hopefully it inspires you know, a new perspective on their own journey. But I want to say thank you to each of you, Ian, Andrew, and Garvia, for sitting down for this master class in image making and communication. Miigwech.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.